Hello, this is Power in the Word, and I'm Scott Reed. Thanks for joining me for another study session in our Come Follow Me New Testament. This particular session is that on Revelation chapter 13. It's the last of our single chapters to actually study in the book of Revelation. And in context, you'll have to be sure that you have viewed chapter 12 because this is in context of what happens in chapter 12. So with that little introduction, and thank you for joining me, let's jump right into our scriptures. Here you see chapter 13. I've given you in the heading here a reminder that chapter 12 should have already been viewed. Love that you're looking at my Book of Revelation playlist. Thank you. In the heading, note that Joseph Smith makes this statement. He said, in relation to the kingdom of God, the devil always sets up his kingdom at the very same time in opposition to God. That's why you have to know chapter 12, because chapter 12 is when God set up his kingdom. So here's Satan now, meaning to counter that by setting up his kingdom. As you can see in your heading, John sees fierce-looking beasts that represent degenerate earthly kingdoms controlled by Satan. Good heading to underline. Right up front, we're going to see here in 1a that there is a footnote that is a must. Note it just reads here in regular verse 1, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We saw this dragon-like beast from chapter 12, and upon his head he wears 10 crowns with these horns upon his head, and the name of blasphemy is upon his written on his forehead. Now note the change in this. Joseph Smith says that it's supposed to read, I saw another sign in the likeness of the kingdoms of the earth. So already he's changed that this beast, as in your heading, represents earthly kingdoms. That a beast rise up out of the sea, and he stood upon the sand of the sea, having 7 heads. Okay, little bit different. For help, here is some notes then. Notice the word beast, very interesting word. In Greek, it's therion, which means it's metaphorical or figurative. It's not a literal beast. He's only seen this image of something. Okay, so denoting the beast to be an image for something else. We'll look more closely why this beast represents the kingdoms of this earth. Second of all, the beast rises up out of the sea. See, Revelation 17:15 is a great note because like evolution itself, our origins came up out of water. Okay? Much like our own life's mortality, we came out of water through birth. Well, this carries this same imagery that upon the sea is the place where all nations, kindred, tongue, and people dwell. Revelation 17:15, fantastic verse there. We have 7 heads and 10 horns on this beast in imitation and counterfeit to all that is good. 7 heads, 7, remember, is perfection, spiritual perfection, and 10 is the number of complete, and horn is a symbol of power. So here is this image of that Satan paints now with those kingdoms of the world that he imitates perfectly complete power. That's good. That's good imagery. Notice they wear a crown. Now, we looked at crown last chapter. The word was Stephanos, which was the laurel leaves of victory. In this case, though, the Greek is not Stephanos, it's diadema. It's the metal crown, or the political crown of dominion, complete power. It is not the symbol of victory. Okay, which should give you a great foresight that this is not going to come off well for him. Next, we see that upon his head was the name of blasphemy, in direct opposition to the name of the Father. We saw in Revelation 14:1, that's next lesson, we actually have blasphemy on the beast's forehead. The root for blasphemy, meaning scurrilous, or the making or spreading scandalous claims about someone with the intention of damaging their reputation. Okay, that's what he has written on his name. That of both against, notice, man, and specifically against God. So he is the father of lies and contention, and he is after both man and God. So good word to represent him and what he thinks to do. Okay, verse 2. Now, the imagery, I find that this chapter is one of the tougher ones because John tries to paint imagery for you that goes counter to what you already know about God's kingdom. So note here, he says, this beast that he saw was like. So he's not a leopard, this beast, but he's like a leopard. He is like a bear. He is like a lion. So underline those three words. How are the kingdoms of the earth like those specific animals? Well, those animals are also talked about in one of Daniel's great dreams. Daniel chapter 7, verses 4 through 7, talks about that he sees the kingdoms of the earth to be like leopards, bears, and lions. The kingdoms of this earth are swift like a leopard. They're strong like a bear and courageous like a lion. Note, Joseph Smith stated, in words of Joseph Smith, the beasts are spoken of to represent the kingdoms of the world, the inhabitants whereof were beastly and abominable characters. They were murderous, corrupt, carnivorous, and brutal in their disposition, which we see the kingdoms of this world, or you'd say the nations, are swift to capture or to inflict their strength on other nations and kingdoms. So good descriptions of what Satan now counters to that of Christ's kingdom. So note, Christ's kingdom is been described, remember, in Daniel chapter 2, one of his other visions. Let me just take you there. Remember that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Daniel is going to reveal that dream to him about what the kingdom of God is like. So if we come down to verse 36, he'll begin to tell you what that dream is like. It represented Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, okay? Alexander the Great with the Greeks, the Caesars with Rome, and these kingdoms that would march forth on the earth at different times. But note in 44 and 45, he says something about the kingdom of God. This kingdom, this political kingdom that was to be raised up by deity, he says, 44, in the days of these kings, so all these kings that we just went through, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which, 1, it shall never be destroyed. 2, it shall not be left to other people. 3, it shall break into pieces and consume all these other kingdoms. It shall stand forever. And he states in 45, for as much as thou sawest that it was a stone that was cut out of a mountain without hands. Now, interesting, it's not man-made, but it is cut out of stone. Cut denotes the idea of cutting covenants, and that it has shape and size to it. Out of a mountain would associate it with the pattern of heaven being like a temple, and that it would break into pieces all these other kingdoms. It is not man-made, it is God's kingdom. I love that it's in the image of a stone. You might want to darken this word right here in 45. The word stone in Hebrew is Eben. E, or El, we would say, represents God the Father. Ben is actually the word for son. So the stone is the kingdom of the Father and the Son. Great imagery given to us by Daniel. So here in Revelation chapter 13, as we look at Satan's counterfeit to the kingdoms of the earth, Christ's kingdom has already been established. We saw it last chapter in being a woman that would birth a child, or the political kingdom coming out of the religious church or ecclesiastical kingdom that we currently are. And not till the millennial day will we move into being political. Note then, this beast is going to have power given it. It is the dragon, here in verse 2, that gives him his power and his seat and his authority. So you would say the dragon, which we know is Satan. Joseph Smith said that we're to translate dragon, which is a mistranslation, into that of devil. That it's the devil that fuels and pushes forward with power and authority the political kingdoms of this world. So, as we note this first verses are going to be 1 through 8 or 1 through 9 or 10, we see the political power of Satan through fear, deception, complete control as a shadow of the reality of Christ's realm. Notice his imitation. Okay, in verse 3, I gave one of his heads of this dragon, okay, or this beast, as it were, wounded to death. So it dies, and his deadly wound was healed. That is in imitation of resurrection. And all the world will wonder after this beast. Okay? Interesting. 4, and they will worship the devil, which gave power unto the beast. Oh, great. Exactly what he's always wanted is for us to worship him. But notice he's the one that's fueling the beasts or the political kingdoms of the world. With absolute power. Now we would ask, where's he getting his power then? Well, just a note here, Satan has no power in and of himself, only that what heaven allows him to have. So we better be sure that when it states in 4, verse 5 and verse 7, that the dragon is powering the beast, it's only what God has allowed him to do. Okay, next, what his purpose? Notice over here in verse 5, and power is given him to continue for 42 months. If you reviewed Revelation chapter 11, 42 months right here was the length of the Battle of Armageddon with the two prophets holding at bay that great army. So power is given the beast to persecute the prophets of God. Nothing new there. And last of all, notice opposition against all that is righteous. Notice this in 6, 7, and 8. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme God's name, to blaspheme his tabernacle, or you would say his temple, and also them that dwell in heaven. The specific form, Richard Draper has written, this blasphemy takes is the claim of Savior. Well, Paul's already warned us about that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. But the salvation the dragon offers is the momentary thrill, the cheap pleasure of the prostitute that is fleeting, empty, and immoral. The beast's seduction or seductive promises are anchored solely in the illusion that one can find happiness and security in iniquity. You and I would, quoting Book of Mormon and the prophet Alma, would say, but wickedness never was happiness, wouldn't we? Verse 7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Okay, that has an allusion to that great battle and also to the great apostasy. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Notice this from President Benson. We live in a day of great challenge. We live in that day which John the Revelator foresaw. The dragon is Satan. So there's a prophetic comment on it, as well as Joseph Smith. Satan is waging war against the members of the church who have testimonies and are trying to keep the commandments. Notice, not those who aren't. He already has them where he wants them. And while many of our members are remaining faithful and strong, some are wavering, some are falling, some are fulfilling John's prophecy that in the war with Satan, some saints would be overcome. And he quotes this reference. So, great allusion to our day, that given almost 30 years ago, 40 years ago in 1986. Wonder if President Benson knew something about what was coming. Now, 1 through 10 then is this great copy of the political power that Satan is going to raise in the last days. Okay, let's jump down to our next one. Our next one is not political, it's his push in religious counterfeit, or the religious apostasy that he will push. Verse 11 states, and I beheld another beast. Okay, so be sure you darken it. This is our second individual or key person. I want to say it's an individual, though. Represents many things. Coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. So there's a counterfeit. There's an imitation. And he spake as a dragon. So a couple of key things. He has 2 suggest witnesses, and horns suggest power. He being like a lamb would be that he is like Christ, or a false Christ, or a false prophet. Revelation 16:13 calls him. Okay, so Satan's second push is not political, it's in the religious category, and Satan counters Christ's true religion and worship. Now, notice what we also already know about this. We see in Daniel chapter 3 a great story of 3 individuals who would not worship an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their story is in Daniel chapter 3. And when the political king, pushing his agenda in religious items, decides that you worship a certain way, when they would not bow to that as righteous examples and witnesses of spiritual salvation provided by true worship, they get thrown in the fire, where they are then saved. So they become the great opposite, or the example of Christ's kingdom's opposite to that of Satan's counterfeit in the subject of religious apostasy. Okay? So it is through imitation and counterfeit, interesting that where Christ's kingdom is that of a woman, Satan's, John paints as a harlot, as a pretended pattern of the reality of a true Christ-like worship. So instead of a bride clean and pure, we have a harlot who has broken commandments, not been obedient to covenants. There is a huge amount of verses here I've given you as examples of how Satan has tampered with the religions of the day. Remember, Joseph Smith said, the Lord in his first vision told him that they speak about him, but their thoughts and their hearts are far from him. We know that they are bound by the philosophies and the creeds of men. So a lot of good verses here for you to look up. Notice they are fueled. Okay, this religious apostasy is fueled by worldly powers. We see this constantly, where a nation or a country will then push a certain religious way upon them, or no religious worship, right? Whether you have, for example, in the great Roman Empire, you have Constantine pushing Christianity, right? That's just one example. You have, we mentioned imitation. Notice that they will exercise all the power of the first beast. They have power. I wonder where it comes from. Okay? Only that which God allows him to have. And in having power, note 13, he will do great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceive them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. Okay, so you begin to see religion have a certain image that they're promoting or pushing. You may want to, by this word miracle, you may want to write Revelation 16:14. We'll talk a little bit more about these miracles or these wonders that God allows and why he allows them to be seen in the world of religion today, but not in the true church of Christ. Okay, that leads us to our third subject. Here it says that they should make a certain image. So here's our third. So you had a beast, you have another beast or a false prophet or counter, and now you have an image. And he had power to give life to this image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be put to death. Okay, so our third subject is that of having a certain image of the beast or of the world. Note that all this is counterfeit as the world marks themselves with the name or a number of this image of the beast or this certain image in this world. It states that here they are to mark themselves, verse 16, all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. By the way, that's 4 groupings. That's all mankind is supposed to mark themselves in their right hand and in their foreheads. That goes directly counterfeit to the marking of phylacteries in the Old Testament under the law of Moses. Remember, phylacteries, here's your reference, Deuteronomy chapter 6, footnote 8b is probably our best. So if we go and we look up phylactery in 8b, note, and I pull up our footnote right here, it states, phylacteries are passages of law written on scrolls of parchment enclosed in teeny boxes bound on the left arm. They would put them right here with 7 coils around their arms, and then they would weave the letter for the Messiah in the palm of their left hand. Okay, that box being closest to their heart. So they would bound these little phylactery boxes with scriptures on them on their left arm and on their forehead as an ordinance of remembering the Mosaic law and wore by Jews during their morning prayers. Okay, so they were to keep him closest to their heart and always in their mind. That's what the phylacteries were actually made to do. So notice the counterfeit is that Satan would like his people to also be marked in their right hand and on their forehead. And that if you do not mark yourself with the name of the beast or the number of that name, then you could not buy or sell anything. Now that's very, very interesting. Okay, So the image here in our third subject is that not of political, like our first image. It's not the second one, which was our religious counterfeit. This time it is our economic imitation. So you have to mark yourself in your hand and on your forehead, or you would say that your actions and your thoughts are always on money. And note, if you just go over 1 to chapter 14, verse 11, it states right here, and they have no rest day nor night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. In fact, this image or counter has so much to do with the economy and money and how do I get ahead, that you think about it day and night. You can't sleep because it is so important. So interesting that this, here is Satan's counter then to God's kingdom. God's kingdom is that of consecration, where Satan's counterfeit then to money and consecrating all things is that of being so consumed with economic and get ahead of all others, the enticement there that comes with more, and the pressure. Notice I wrote then number 3 that the image that must be maintained is through pride and pressure and enticement as an anti-type of the reality of Christ-like consecration. The great example of Christ's kingdom in that case would be that also in the book of Daniel, when Daniel himself will not fall pressure to the enticements of the princes and the pressure there that they're exhorting upon the king. So he goes to the lion's den, and he would be destroyed if it hadn't been for the physical delivery provided by a righteous man in true worship. And so we see a direct counter in scriptures to Satan's counterfeit, again in the book of Daniel. So here's this economic seduction that is pushed upon people. We see that today, that money and toys and more is had. And I find it fascinating that in the end, he marks them, which is a fascinating word in the Greek. Notice the word mark. I would underline both in 16 and 17 the word mark. Mark is the word charagma. The word mark denotes a stamp, an etching, an engraving, or an impression. It is also the description of the band upon an animal or a slave, okay, or upon your cattle, right? You put a brand upon them. Note, it must not be overlooked that it also describes the mark left by a snake when it bites you. Now that's fascinating because we've already seen an imitation of Satan as a serpent. So here's Satan's bite, and he bites you, and the mark that's left for his influence, his poison, his toxin, the affected by the bite of the serpent from the sea, they carry his mark always with them. It affects both their labors, their hands, and their thoughts. So the word mark is a perfect example from John, okay, to describe the poison that comes through this push of economy and money. Now, as we close off, hopefully you've seen the counterfeit in this chapter, both politically, both religious, and both economic, to that of God's kingdom. Satan is rising to meet and give you a choice now in which you have to decide on. So note, he closes this chapter by saying, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast." Note, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 660, which is 60 and 6. Now, there are numerous people that have used this number of 666. I will let you go about what you think, but let me give you some suggestions. First of all, 6 is a significant number of imperfection. We see that 7 is perfect, so 6 is as close as you can get to perfection, but still lacking. Okay, so in Scripture, 6 is the great symbol of imperfection. 3 is associated always with that of a presidency or God, a Godhead. So you have a 6, and a 6. 666. So is this an imperfect or a counterfeit presidency or Godhead that is placed out there and fueled by the dragon himself? Well, here's my note and some references for you to help. My note says, to close, Satan's means of manipulation in the last days is through political power. He would state, I will raise up armies and navies, right? Tyrants that are there to oppress and to control. So the first thing he does, his first 6 or his first subject is to completely control the powers of this earth through political means. Second is to ruin religion by sending in apostate doctrines and those who teach that doctrine, or you would call them false prophets or false priests who are sent to oppress. Third of all is the economic seduction that he pushes in this world of having treasures of earth, on the treasures of the earth, of gold and silver. Now, if you didn't catch that, I hope you did. That sounds really familiar with temple language and what he already has claimed that he's going to do. That's why this is such a fascinating chapter, is because of the implications of what he states. So, denoting a false or an evil trinity, a 6, and a 6, political, religious, and economic. Now, a couple of other interesting notes. Hendrickson, for Hendrickson, it represented a failure upon failure upon failure. A 6, a 6, and a 6. Okay? It is symbolic of the beast's continual failure to accomplish his purpose. Always trying, never being able to do what he desires, and it is the trinity of imperfection. According to Torrance, this evil trinity of 666, Apis, the Holy Trinity, 777, as I stated, but always falls short and fails. Widely divergent views and highly speculative solutions continue to emerge, however, even if we cannot tell who or what the number may literally point to, through numerology or other studies, we understand the message of this passage. Satan sends forth philosophies and servants to do his work. Many who follow Christ and his perfection will suffer greatly in their opposition to Satan's program. But eventually, the wicked will fall and the righteous will prevail. So my note concludes this way for you this week. This chapter concludes this way. There are only dire consequences for those who are deceived and allowed themselves to be involved with the worldly, whether it's politically, religiously, or economically, where one that can walk separately from that and witness continually of Jesus and the Word will be rewarded and reign with God for 1,000 years. We can be victorious again. As noted earlier, we already beat him in chapter 12. We beat him in premortal life. We now have the opportunity to beat him again. Is it possible with such philosophy, economically, politically, and religiously to come off victor? Yes, it is. Note, I've given you, as a close, I've given you a couple of verses here to look up with me. Okay, as we close, let's look at a couple of these things. Chapter 14, verse 10 first. Notice, we see that those who have this, it's actually verse 9 and 10, the third angel says to them, creeping in a little bit of next time study, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive the mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. So you partake of worldly ways, you'll find there are worldly consequences. Okay, very real consequences for being caught in these counterfeits. Notice if we go to chapter 16, verse 2 states, and the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast upon them, which worshipped his image. Okay, so there is another consequence that comes upon those who continue to be caught in Satan's counterfeits. Notice this, though, as you close in 19 verse 2, it states, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornications, and hath avenged the blood of her servants at her hand. Okay? We will see avenge come upon those that have been fooled by either the great whore herself or those who have been involved with her. And last of all, my favorite verse, chapter 20, verse 10, states, "And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake and fire of brimstone, where the beast, the false prophet, are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever." So in the end, we just need to be sure that you know that you can be victorious, that you can win, that it's always been possible for those who desire to obey God, to put Him first, to be disciples of Christ, and to do the things that separate themselves from the rest of the world. And in the end, they will get what is coming to them. Grateful for a chance to talk to you about chapter 13. Some interesting imagery painted there in counterfeit to that of Christ. And I hope that some of those notes and explanations have been helpful in this most difficult chapter. Thanks again for joining me. I hope you'll join me again next week as we move into chapters 14 through 16. And hope you have a great week separating yourself from the things of the world. Till then.